The mahogany box sat heavily on the highly polished surface of the solicitor's table, a grotesque interruption to the austere decor of the office. Its wood was dark, almost black, smelling faintly of dried lavender and decades of neglect, and it was the singular focus of Elias Thorne's escalating discomfort. He had come expecting the standard formalities of an old money inheritance: stocks, bonds, the eventual disposition of Blackwood Manor. Instead, he had been presented with this ancient artifact by Mr. Caldwell, the family's longtime stoic legal counsel, who looked unusually strained. The instruction read aloud from the codicil, appended hastily just weeks before Eleanor Thorne's death, was stark and unsettling. To my grandson Elias, I bequeath the Thorne box, which must be opened privately and alone, and its contents studied before any other assets are claimed or distributed. This is not a gift, but a trust. Fail in this, and you forfeit the entirety of the Thorne estate. Elias, a man accustomed to logic and predictable structures in his work as a highly sought-after architectural historian, felt a chill that had nothing to do with the air conditioning. The Thornes were supposed to be above melodrama. They were the epitome of New England generational wealth, respectable, philanthropic, built on a foundation of shipping and banking that stretched back to the early 1800s. Yet the gravity with which his mother, seated across the room, avoided his gaze suggested that the foundation wasn't built purely on virtue, but perhaps on something far more fragile and carefully maintained: silence. He took the box, its weight surprising, and carried it back to his modern city apartment, the heavy scent of old wood clashing aggressively with the clean lines of glass and steel surrounding him.
Blackwood Manor, the oppressive and sprawling estate where his grandmother had spent her final, increasingly withdrawn years, was where the Thorne legacy truly dwelt, a monument not just to wealth, but to the deep, lingering shadows of the past. Elias always preferred the clarity of the city. Blackwood felt like a breath held too long. Seated at his desk, the silence of the night magnifying the sound of his own nervous breathing, Elias finally inserted the tiny brass key Caldwell had provided. The mechanism turned with a muffled thunk, less a lock giving way and more a seal being broken. The interior of the box contained no jewels, no gold, and no final letters of affection. Instead, there was a single, small, tarnished silver key and a thick, linen-bound journal, its pages brittle with age, secured by a heavy leather strap. The journal had no title, but the name Silas Thorne, penned in elegant, looping script, was visible on the first yellowed page. Silas Thorne, Elias's great-great-grandfather, the man credited with consolidating the family fortune during the explosive industrial boom of the 1890s. Elias ran a finger over the inscription. He remembered Grandma Eleanor's peculiarities now, her obsessive cleaning, her almost frantic avoidance of the attic stairs, and the brief, terrifying episodes when she would clutch his arm and whisper frantically about the reckoning and the debt owed. He had dismissed it all as the sad decline of an aging mind. Now, holding Silas's heavy journal, the episodes gained a chilling clarity. He opened the journal. The ink was faded, the handwriting meticulous, but the content immediately struck a discordant note against the polished historical narrative he had been raised on. It wasn't standard business records or philosophical ramblings. It was a deeply personal, often paranoid account of events occurring in 1888. The language was coded, full of abbreviations and allusions to the oversight and the necessity of the final solution. One entry, dated October 14, 1888, was particularly disturbing. The Oakhaven resistance is stronger than anticipated. They possess knowledge that could unravel everything. They must be silenced, completely. The cost of legacy is always blood, and silence is the cost of clean hands. Elias felt a prickle of unease turn into a cold, hard dread. The Oakhaven name rang a distant historical bell. He remembered a brief mention in a local history text about a rival shipping family who had mysteriously lost their entire commercial fleet and manor house in a devastating, unexplained fire late in the 19th century, an event that coincidentally cemented the Thorne monopoly. It had always been labeled an accident, perhaps faulty wiring or a disgruntled employee. He set the journal aside, needing air. The second item, the small silver key, now demanded attention. It looked like a skeleton key, antique and specialized. It clearly did not belong to any door in his modern life. It belonged to Blackwood. Driving back to the manor the next morning, Elias felt like an unwelcome visitor in his own history. Blackwood stood sentinel against the gray sky, its Victorian spires oppressive. He bypassed the main entrance and went straight to the west wing, the oldest, most neglected part of the estate, rumored to have been sealed off since the 1920s due to structural concerns. It housed the original library, which his grandmother had fiercely forbidden anyone to enter, even maintenance workers. Using his architectural knowledge, Elias located the heavy bronze door hidden behind a massive, useless tapestry depicting a pastoral scene that felt deeply ironic. The silver key slid into the ancient lock with unnerving ease. The tumbler mechanism groaned, a sound like dry bones shifting, and the heavy door gave way.
The air that rushed out was dead, tasting of dust, mildew, and something sharply metallic, like old pennies or sulfur. It was not merely the smell of neglect, it was the smell of stagnation and decay, of secrets held hostage. He was no longer investigating a historical curiosity, he was breaching a carefully guarded tomb of history. Inside the small, windowless room, the air pressure seemed to drop instantly. The chamber was not a library annex, as family lore suggested. It was a vault. Stacked high were meticulously labeled crates and shelves containing artifacts and documents that made Elias's heart pound against his ribs. One shelf held half a dozen small, leather-bound books, journals, similar to the one he carried, spanning decades. On a heavy wooden table sat a massive bound ledger, its spine cracked, dated 1887-1889. Elias, sweating despite the cold air of the vault, flipped open the ledger. This was not coded language. This was detailed accounting.
The entries listed unusual expenditures for deterrent materials, disposal coordination, and specific payments to individuals unknown to the Thorne family annals, all occurring in the months leading up to the Oakhaven disaster. And then he found the heart of the darkness. Tucked inside the ledger was a loose folded sheet of parchment, a final testament written by Silas Thorne, far more direct than his diary, a confession. It detailed the systemic, calculated sabotage and eventual arson of the Oakhaven fleet and residents. It was not an accident. It was a methodical purge to eliminate a commercial threat that had acquired evidence of the Thorne family's earlier illicit activities which included fraudulent land acquisition and the use of exploited labor. The fire was set not just to destroy property, but to erase all evidence. And tragically, the Oakhaven family, including 3 children, had been home that fatal night. Silas had ensured the local authorities, already compromised by Thorne influence, classified it as an industrial tragedy. I acted for the future, the chilling confession concluded. I secured the Thorne name, ensuring its immortality and our prosperity. The price was paid. It must never be spoken of, lest the entire foundation collapse. Eleanor, my great-granddaughter, is entrusted with guarding this final chamber, should the need arise. Elias stumbled back, dropping the parchment. The sound echoed deafeningly in the sealed vault. Every piece of art, every ounce of prestige, every charitable donation the Thorne name had ever commanded was financed by the murder of an entire innocent family and the cover-up of industrial espionage and exploitation. The respected Thorne legacy wasn't built on virtue, it was cemented in ash and the blood of those Silas had silenced. Elias felt physically sick, the weight of a century of deceit crushing him. He was not merely an heir, he was the beneficiary of a monstrous crime.
Now he held the unimpeachable evidence. The legacy was poisoned, irrevocably tainted. The silence was broken. The question that screamed through the suffocating atmosphere of the vault was this: the comfortable myth of his noble ancestors with the sickening reality of ruthless criminals. The time for denial was over. The Thorne Foundation was a lie, and Elias knew that securing his own sanity now meant determining if he was going to rebuild on that blood-stained ground or expose the rot entirely.